Welcome back to another episode of Bars Loaded Podcast, episode 28 with Kev Toonen. Kev is a strength and conditioning coach, both online and in person, hailing out of Brisbane, Australia. Kev's also the former head of strength and power for the Sydney Roosters NRL club. We speak during this podcast about Kev's time at the Roosters, both in and out of the COVID bubble, how he was able to manage running the strength and conditioning program for such a large and successful organization. Some great insights there. We speak about powerlifting, strength training, Kev's thoughts on different training methodologies and everything in between. This was a super fun chat for us to have. Ben and I both really enjoyed it, and we hope that you guys enjoy it just as much. And welcome back to Bars Loaded Podcast with Ben and Nick.
Yeah, that'd be good.
You can hear it in retrospect.
Yeah, why not?
It's like super awkward sitting there listening to someone say all these things about you, and you're like, oh, do I have to listen to this?
Especially when we can, stare at each other's eyes as well. It gets weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, it gets super weird. So you're up in Brisbane now?
Yeah. So up in Brisbane, I've been here now. It's been about 18 months, I think. Before that was Sydney, and I spent 10, 11 years in Sydney. And before that, a little bit of Perth, and before that, I was in Sydney again as well. But I just basically bounced between Sydney and Brisbane, just more so just chasing a lifestyle more than anything else.
Yeah, are you loving Brisbane?
Yeah, I grew up here, and I left I left in '98, and I vowed never to come back because it was too boring. There wasn't anything going on, and then the second COVID lockdown, I was working with the Roosters then as the S&C, and we got locked down. I use that term fucking loosely. In the Novotel and Twin Waters. So there was us, Manly, Newcastle and Penrith. And I just remember thinking fuck, this place is so nice. And we got to fly around all around Queensland. We got to pop up in and out of Brisbane all the time. I just remember the weather, and I just forgot, I think, how nice it was. But to be honest, it's the people. Queenslanders are just nicer in general.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. I spent a couple of years up there playing Queensland Cup for South Logan. And the moment I got there, I was just like, oh, this place is so much better. People are nicer. The weather's better. Everyone just seems a lot more relaxed and happy.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, happy. I honestly think after living in Sydney for a long period of time, and mind you, I probably lived in the wankiest places in Sydney too. That was, my fault, so I had there seemed to be a large collection of bellends where I was. And I probably contributed massively to that collection as well. But I think just everyone seems to be more relaxed. I love the fact that the coolest thing we have here in Brisbane is the 400 metres of expensive shops on James Street. And then either side you've got Brunswick Street, which is full of crackies and homeless people, and you've got housing estates everywhere else. So I love the idea of a mum in a Range Rover almost hitting, a crackhead as she drives out of one of the hotels. I think that's me. That's Brisbane in a nutshell.
It's funny that you mention or bring up the lockdown in the Novotel. I do S&C for a rugby league team down here this year, and one of the guy that actually hooked me up with the gig, he's my trainer at the Knights for forever. He ended up going on and being the head trainer at first grade for Newcastle for many, many years. And when I mentioned to him that we had this podcast with you, I showed him your Instagram. He's like, oh, I know that guy from the bubble, from the NRL bubble.
Yeah. The bubble was awesome. I swear, if we all said the same thing, is that if we could do that every single year, it'd be the perfect season. 4 or 5 months, and then say lockdown, like we were just, all you could do is eat, sleep, and train. We'd do everything as a team, everything as staff. It was so good. Yeah, and I think everyone enjoyed it. Everyone enjoyed it, and luckily the NRL allowed the guys who had families to bring them along if they wanted to. So no one was missing out. The kids, they got such an education. So we still had Fitzy as the assistant coach of the Roosters then, and Fitzy's eldest boy was was like running on for Penrith, was running on for Manly, was running on, and this is all just during training during the week. I was doing school and then like running back, and they're like, "Fuck, we need a kicker." You're like, Eamon, you're on the wing, and then coming on and doing stuff for the Roosters as well. So, but he just got signed by St. George, I think, late last year. But like that was
Nice.
his basically year 12 was like, you do a bit of schoolwork and then just get this pedigree of training throughout the week. It was brilliant.
How good's that?
Yeah, there wouldn't be a better time for like a young kid, and just getting blasted by Fitzy every 5 seconds, just saying how shit he was.
So we will go back. We will circle all the way back and kind of get you to outline how you started. But I think we're on a really interesting topic now. Did you work with the Roosters at all outside of the bubble, or just those lockdown years?
Yeah. So that's how I sort of fell ass backwards into it all. So I left Perth, came to Sydney, and just started doing some like really basic S&C stuff on the fringes with rugby union. So I was lucky enough early on to run into, when I was in Perth, we had the Crusaders come through, and I was training in this gym, and I saw this like massive like troll-looking fellow doing like snatches for time. And I just sort of had a bit of a giggle to myself because I was like, what the fuck are a professional rugby union players doing CrossFit for? Like I thought it was a bit stupid. And this has been, probably a blessing and also a curse for my entire life, is that I have an inability not to say what I think out loud. So I said it to this guy. I was like, the fuck you doing CrossFit for? Aren't you a professional athlete? And that guy was Owen Franks. And then Owen was like, oh, but like this is why we do it. And I was like, yeah, but you guys carry a GPS, like you know exactly what you need, what you don't need. And he started going on about like why burpees are great, and I was just like, mate, CrossFit didn't invent the burpee.
Yeah.
Nothing. Apart from putting barbells in more people's hands. I think as a modality for sport, it's really shit. Anyway, we sort of agreed to disagree, and we walked away from each other. And I just thought, like, fuck, and I really didn't know too much about him at that point. A couple of weeks later, I got this Twitter message from his brother Ben, who's a fucking angry man. And Ben's message was like, I heard you were talking shit about our training. I was like, I'm going to get bashed. And I just said, no, I wasn't talking shit. What I was saying is that, like, I'm assuming you guys have all this data, and I'm confused as to why you wouldn't use it to make yourself better for your position. Like, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, CrossFit is a global thing to get better at doing stuff where you're an elite athlete, you should be doing. Anyway, he came through not long after. I think he was playing for the Highlanders at that point. He came through, we sat down, we chatted. A couple of weeks later, I got a message on Twitter off their dad, Ken. And Ken just picked up, flew out to Perth, and stayed for a couple of days just talking shit. Because at that time, he was doing their training and organising stuff. Chatted with me for a couple of days. We trained, we ate, and then he went home. And a few weeks after that, I get a message from Owen just saying, Dad says we have to train with you now. So that was how I sort of got into it all. Was that, like, I picked up Owen and Ben Franks, and that was written into their contracts that they could do their own S&C stuff. So that's how I started. And through Owen, I picked up Sakopa Kepu, and through those guys, I picked up Offer Tuang Fussy. So I used to do pre-season and training and programming for these guys. Just they used to come in and say, like, they wanted to get stronger, they want to get faster, they wanted to like shape up their pre-season a little bit or their off-season. And so I used to get these players coming in and out from where I was in Sydney all the time. And then every now and again, I'd get a couple of the Roosters boys who needed help, and Robbo would say like, "Hey, you've got capacity to take this guy on, or we need a little bit more extra attention on this guy. We don't have the capacity to do it in club at this point." So I used to get that. And then one year, Robbo just said like, hey, have you got more capacity to take on like, a few more hours? And I was like, yeah, I do. And he's like, okay. He's like, how about you become like head of strength and power for the Roosters? I was like, yep, all right. So you don't say no to Robbo. That's one thing you learn pretty quickly is that wasn't sort of a question. That was a statement from Robbo.
Yeah.
And that was, again, and that was just, that was, I think, right place, right time. And Robbo who sort of trained with me a little bit. So we sort of got this back and forth going. He knew who I was. I knew who he was. And that was like how I got the job, was through that. And, it was absolutely brilliant. It was some of the best times I've ever had. The club's great. The boys are great. The coaching staff are phenomenal. And then, sport's just a lot of fun. It's so much fun.
Yeah. So that's initially when I found you on Instagram and started following, and you and I had started having a few conversations back then, because I initially found you through the Footy Boys as well. But I'd be interested. So working with the guys outside of the bubble versus inside of the bubble, where everything outside of their life was restricted other than eating, training, and playing. How big of a difference did you notice from your end in like the recovery and how well they were performing physically in the bubble versus outside?
We just had a lot more visual on what they were doing. That's the big difference. And that's something we always talk about as like coaches, and you guys probably exactly the same, is that, you have these guys and girls in front of you for like 90 minutes, maybe a day, and then they leave. And then they're like, I don't know why the training doesn't work, and they're like, usually it's a hand to mouth issue of like, shoveling food in, or they don't sleep well, or lifestyle and stress. So when it's outside the bubble, they'll drive off, and full well that 90% of the team are going through about 4 different drive-through windows on their way home. Like KFC, McDonald's are getting a fucking hammering. And you don't know if they're up late gaming or whatever. That's a huge one. I like playing Call of Duty and fucking, Madden and things, but as soon as my eyes get heavy at these days at 8 o'clock, I'm going to sleep. And those boys are just like, they're kicking into 1 or 2 in the morning. In the bubble, so different. Like, plus, first of all, we had cars that they could only drive. So, and then as sort of we held the keys. So if they wanted the car keys, they'd be like, oh, can I borrow the car keys to take the van into town or something? And you're like, why? Where are you going? But we all lived in the same building. So you'd hear them at night, you'd say to them, like, hey, if you're going to go to the beach today, we know we're going to day off, we're playing tomorrow, don't lie in the sun and get dehydrated as fuck the day before the game. Drink water, stay out of the sun. I know you want to tan, but restrict it to 20, 30 minutes. When you're outside, the bubble, you have no visual on that. It's just a trust thing. And full well that the 1%ers, when they're flying so close to the sun in terms of elite athletes, they make a huge difference. And they especially towards the end of a season. So inside in the bubble, we had visual on all the physical preparation, the recovery, but also mentally how they're doing. So we just got closer to the boys, because you hung out every single day. You had breakfast, lunch, dinner. We had some of the most epic gel blasting games, because the boys, obviously all the stuff here in Queensland's legal. So they all went to the Gold Coast, got these fucking mad gel blasters, and they invented cartels for themselves, and they were blasting each other's roll. But it was the most epic amount of fun that I've had as a grown up in a very long time. But the visual you get on a player, how much you learn about them, culturally as well, like the big difference between the different cultures in the team, not only in terms of their cultural background, but culturally what happens with certain groups of players, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. Boys going through the first ever breakups, all that type of stuff goes down. So I loved the bubble more than anything else. I thought it was great. But I also understood how it's like a pressure cooker as well. Like you're in each other's face 24/7. As staff, that was a big one because we'd literally be in with the players, in with the staff, talking, eating, sleeping, all the time with it. So you never got a huge break from it. I enjoyed that, and I think by the end of the season, I was ready to not see anyone for 5 or 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we looked at it purely from a performance point of view, and that year was a tough year because we lost Boydo, Nug, BMOS, Kiri. Like we lost these, like some of the oldest, greatest players. Boydo and Nug to the head knocks, BMOS to a knee, Kez to a knee, and like you just suddenly like this huge gap in leadership. Like I don't think we really understood how much of a gap, especially Nug and Boydo, would leave. We took Boydo with us, so he come into lockdown as well. Just having his presence in the huddle, like during those quick water breaks, was a huge benefit. But I don't think we picked up on how many extra carries Boydo would do. It was like having 2 extra players on the field with those 2 guys, and then you lose that, and you just don't come across a Boyd or a Jake Friend. That they're a generational player. That's once in a lifetime. So that was a tough year, but you learn a lot. As a coach, you learn so much from those things.
Yeah, I mean, two really interesting things out of that, because if you think about, like you said, you think about like all of the studies that are done, you read all of the textbooks, all of the literature, which I'm a little bit on the fence of whether it's useful or not. Half the time it is, half the time it isn't. It's all done in a vacuum, right? In a perfect world. So in the bubble, you kind of get that environment where it almost is a perfect world for performance. But then you also get the aspect of, as a coach, like we know that it's all about relationships, and the better the relationship that we have with the players, the more willing they're going to be to put in.
Yeah.
So it's almost like this perfect fire of, you're existing in a vacuum, and then you also have the ability to strengthen and further those relationships, which is going to have them putting in even further. So you can definitely see how an environment like that, performance would just be like significantly increased.
Yeah, I thought it was. I thought it was phenomenal, and it was good because it allowed you to grab hold of issues as they happened, and I think it just accelerated everyone's their tradecraft. But we couldn't take a sports scientist with us because we got to choose like who went. And so from a performance standpoint, it was myself and the head of performance, Trav. So we were the ones doing the field and the gym stuff. Sports scientists, like she stayed behind, and the other S&C stayed behind. So I was lumped with GPS reports, downloading GPS like on field when the boys are running. I'm sitting behind a computer, learning on the fly. And I actually was really lucky. I went to the I think it was the Manly sports scientist, because they ended up bringing a sports scientist along. And I was just like, put the catapult stuff in front of him, and I was like, please explain. Like, why can I not get this right? GPS is, fucking out. Boys like just taking their GPSs home, like back to their rooms, not taking them out of their jerseys, washing them things. And you learn very quickly. Like, I think they're like $4,000 a piece or something. So, and that's not a big deal for the Roosters, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But probably do that on breakfast these days. But it was great from my point of view. Was like I just got to get exposed to so much. But you're 100% correct in like you can have the best program in the world, and I agree 100%. Like I think all the cool shit and all the sexy stuff that people do and jazz out, that's great for a tiny percent. And I still believe, and I think most people would agree that like NRL, and guys and girls at best, probably intermediate to like starting to be advanced, in terms of strength. They never really jump out of that. They're not like elite at all. They're they're strong, but they're freakishly strong because they're like that type of the person. So the cool, sexy stuff, post injury, yep, to get them ready to play again. But you're looking at trying to bolster like confidence as much as you're trying to make sure that like you have both sides of the body all lined up. But most of the time, they need a good base level of strength, and then they need to be able to, display their power and athleticism. The field allows them to do that. Like our job is to basically make sure they have the tissue is robust enough that they can get through those games and do that sort of stuff. And if they don't like you, they fucking won't train hard. So, you need to have a good relationship with them. And that's it. Like the boys aren't going to put in 100% if they don't like you as a person, even if they don't trust you either. And that goes for any program,
So out of curiosity, how do you have you ever been in a position where you've been working with, whether it's, any of the guys from the Roosters or like any guys previously, where it's like you need to get them to work hard? If they don't like you as a person, is there a way that you can still sort of build a level of trust with them where it's like, you may not like me, but you trust and respect me enough to still do the job that I'm asking you to do? Is there a way that you've found that's been successful in terms of facilitating that?
I think I've been lucky enough that, like most athletes, everyone has their differences, but most athletes want to win, despite everything else around them. So they're smart enough to know that they'll just do what they need to do, or an injury will correct this for you. They'll come back like pre ACL, pre sort of like shoulder or surgery or anything like that. Some of the guys would be a little bit like, I can get away with doing what I want. And then when they come back from injury or they have their first little scare, they're like, oh shit, like this is what I need. Or they get embarrassed on a field, where they're like, I haven't got the same strength as this guy. But I always found like, you don't necessarily I never wanted to be their best mate. That was one thing I really understood, is that like, I'm not here to be your best friend. I'm here to support you 100%. I'm here to take care of you. If you need something, I'll always do my best. But there needs to be a line between like, I fucking need you to do this. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. But you're going to get exposed, not by me, but by the leadership group. So most of the time the leadership group would sort that guy out, by some like low level bullying or whatever they needed to do. But I think within with the Roosters, no issue. And do a bit of work with the Sharks, again, no issue, because they want to win so badly. And those two coaches between Fitzy and Robbo select their team based off attitude, and what type of men they are. That's why they're very, very successful, robust teams. I think that's something that's overlooked a lot. Like a coach is a man manager, and I haven't seen anyone do it better than Robbo and Fitzy, to be honest. It's just like watching that movie A Beautiful Mind when those two get together, especially now on opposite teams. It's great to watch. But they know how to select like key players in certain areas, and they just stand back and let it happen.
Yeah, I had a little bit of exposure to Robbo back when he was assistant to Brian at Newcastle, and yeah, he's just a freak.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a reason why that club's been so successful with him at the top for so long.
Yeah, and what he's great at is exposing everyone to a whole bunch of different shit. Like I've done sweat TPs, I've done breathing in Mullumbimby with guys with one name. We've done all these things, and what he says is like, I don't expect you to pick everything up. Like Robbo loves to drink green tea and little mixtures of shit, walks barefoot everywhere, trains a lot. He's very philosophical. But likes to expose people to stuff. He's like, pick it up or don't pick it up. But what you're going to get coming to the Roosters is you're going to get exposed to a whole bunch of different stuff. You're going to get exposed to different ways of thinking. The idea for the Roosters is not to make better players, but better men, because better men will become better players because they want to work hard.
Yeah.
Fitzy's very much the same. He's like, coach the guy, coach the man, and the skills and everything else will come. Like that guy loves you, you love him, and then it'll work because he wants to work for you. I watched something the other day. I don't know if you guys follow like Summer Strong and Winter Strong with Sorenex, but a friend of mine, Rusty Witt, is a college coach. And he talks about like what he aims for the most with his players is like, it's got to come from a place of like absolute respect and dedication from the top down and then from the bottom up. If your players, if your staff are willing to do everything they need to do because they care about you on a cellular level, then the team's going to be successful. Not necessarily in the first or second season, but that culture will breed itself. And you get that feeling when you walk into the Roosters or to the Sharks, is that it's just expected that we never played for the top 8. We played to win premierships. That's the whole point. Like, the idea is, and Robbo would explain it was, if I have to explain it to someone, then we've missed the mark. Like, you should just have that feeling. So there was never an induction process when you walked into that place. It was like, if you don't feel it, if you don't understand it, if you don't get it, you probably don't belong here.
That's awesome. So, all right, we're 25 minutes in. We've obviously everyone here now knows that Kev was a strength and conditioning coach for the Roosters, which is pretty much the dream. If you're a strength and conditioning coach, that's like up there with like, this is my dream job. Take us back to the start, the origin story. How did you find the gym? Why did you find the gym? And then kind of where did that lead you to fill in the gaps? How did you start? How did that lead you to the Roosters? What happened in between?
So I found the gym very, very early on. I think I was, I blame my dad on this one because I think he let me watch Lethal Weapon 1 when I was way too young. This is when mullets were fucking proper cool.
Are they not?
Yeah. Well, they're back now. I just hate the idea that all the hipsters have grabbed hold of them.
Yeah, I hate that I can't grow one.
Well, yeah, you and I are blessed with just probably the same sort of speed. That's what I say. But yeah, I always I grew up like loving all those action movies, and I just wanted to be bigger. Like, so I got I think in year 7, year 8, so that's primary school. And I got some dumbbells, some York dumbbells, which you put the weights on, you screw the things in. And I was just doing bicep curls and shoulder press. And I think I put my back out to the point where I don't think I could go to school one day. And my mum didn't believe me. She was like, you can't, you haven't hurt your back. You haven't done anything. Then I really got into it in year 8. And I was doing a lot of martial arts at the time. So my dad was an Australian judo champ. That means that we did judo 3 or 4 times a week. I had a choice in the morning, every morning on Monday to Friday, which is we either ran or we got to swim. That was the choice. Generally in winter, old balls would make us swim because he was always like, oh, it's better for your mind. And that's my nickname for my dad is old balls. And so I just I love the physicality of stuff, and then I was trying to figure out how do I get better at sport, and then I got introduced to the gym, and it was just it was a classic bodybuilding gym here in Brisbane, and I used to have to walk or ride there. I fell in love with it straight away. This is when you those cardboard bits of programs where it was penciled in. It was just back buys. Chest tries. I had a 5-day bro split, probably from the age of 14. I was doing leg press, leg extension, and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't as jacked as everyone else. I thought I'm eating right, I'm training right, and I did this this bro bodybuilding split from the ages of 14 till maybe 17, 18, and I got bigger and I got stronger. But I was never lean and jacked like everyone else. I didn't understand why. So this is back in the day too, when the internet wasn't around. So you had to read books. Muscle and Fitness was one of the things. So I just kept going into. I bought Arnie's encyclopedia of like movements. I got into that, and I just enjoyed sport and training, and I'd always just found that like by being bigger and stronger, it was just a lot easier. And then I don't think I really learnt how to squat or do anything along those lines until about 2008 or 9. It's because I got embarrassed in some sort of like, I don't know what you call it, like a fitness or training type of scenario where there was guys and girls who had obviously done CrossFit for a while, and I'd done running, swimming, lifted weights, barely touched barbells for anything else other than like bicep curls, and got exposed one day. Like I couldn't do a power clean. I couldn't back squat more than 90 kilos. I did one of those crane looking deadlifts where, my vertebrae almost spat out the side of like 100 kilos. I couldn't bench press much. So I went down. I found this guy called Mark Twight. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He did Jim Jones back in the day. So Mark Twight was like a climber and just a bit of a weird guru of sense, where like pain and suffering was one of those things that he sort of embraced. So I just sort of followed this, like, I guess, early days of what everyone calls functional fitness now, but it was like a lot more heavy barbell work, power cleans, complexes and things like that. But I did that for about 2 or 3 years, and I'd never been so injured in my life. Like my knees were fucked, my elbows, my shoulders, like I was fit but broken all the time, and I didn't understand why I needed to strap up every single limb and knee bands and all that sort of stuff. Then I just sort of got interested in like, oh, well, I better start studying or looking into books. And this is when, like, if you wanted to learn more, you had to go and put yourself in front of strength coaches. I went to the States. I spent time, like, this is on my holidays. I went to the States, spent time with different coaches. I went into, I actually rang Jim Jones and tried to get on the phone with Mark Twight once. But he just told me to come out and do a training camp and then just hang around and observe. And then I just thought, like, oh, I better start reading some more books. I probably found like Louis Simmons and the West Side stuff, and then that sort of like flipped it all for me once I got into that. And that was probably 2010 or 11, and when I sort of just started looking at all the West Side stuff, and then Mark Rippertoe, and then I've absolutely fell in love with barbells. At the time, I started doing like all the ASCA stuff, the level 1s and level 2s. I sat on the board for the TSAC, or the Tactical Strength and Conditioning Association as well. And I was lucky to be around and surrounded by just super smart guys at early stages of ASCA. And I couldn't get enough of it. And then you realize at that point how little you know as a coach. Like you hit this point where you think you're killing it because you've got this one modality where everyone does the same shit. And then suddenly you realize that instead of having one tool, like this multi-tool to do all things, you have this fucking massive toolbox, and you look at the training principles and apply the right methodology behind this. And it always just made more sense to me. Like I couldn't figure out why everyone wasn't trying to get strong, and not like size wise. It's like, why aren't you getting strong in this range? Why aren't you getting like building stronger tissue, ligaments and tendons? Why aren't we trying to increase the ability, of you to produce power? Like, how is that ever going to be a bad thing? And I love the idea behind sport as well. Like I love the idea that you could be the strongest guy in the gym and you could be the fucking worst player out there. And that's why I love sport. Is that like it almost flips training on its head, So I love the idea of the crossover between that, of like increasing someone's athleticism, increasing their strength output, their power output, their like how quickly they recover, longevity in terms of training and sport. And once you sort of dip your head into an athlete world, I always found that every coach, whether it's an S&C, whether it's a skills coach, they're always so open and then was so willing to answer questions. And then that's pretty much all I've ever done is like tried to figure out, like I've tried to figure out who knows more about the subject, and then just gone and try and learn. I'm still to this day, I still sign up to courses. I still do a lot of online stuff. I still listen to podcasts. I'll still run over, and I've got books and books upstairs, which I still read because I feel like I'm always going to be a lifelong learner. Like I don't think I'm exceptionally gifted in any way, shape, or form. I just really hammer in the basics. And I don't think I've ever fell in love with a subject as much as this. Like I could, talk about strength training, talk about physiology, talk about recovery, until my hair grows back, which is never going to happen. But it's the idea behind, like, we've almost got a lot of the answers sitting here waiting for us, and I love the idea. It's like problem solving situation. And I love that you can apply this template, and this template works so well for so many different things. I just don't think I can't get bored of it. And I love being strong. I have this ultimate fear of being weak. That's my biggest fear in life, is when the numbers start staying still, or they go the opposite way. And at 45, they're still moving in the right direction, but fuck, it's slowed down.
Yeah, I know the feeling. So you mentioned Westside, you mentioned training methodologies. Obviously, I follow you on Instagram, so I know you speak about training principles, training methodologies a fair bit, the right amount. And yeah, like I said, you mentioned Westside. Is that I feel like from the outside in, and from what I know of you, you don't just stick to one methodology. It's not like you like Westside, so everyone does Westside, or you like linear, everyone does linear. I feel like you kind of pick the tool for the job or for the athlete that's in front of you. Would you say that that's correct? And how have you kind of formed the ability, I guess, to just not be married to one idea?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I hate the idea of the coach who says, this is how I train, everyone trains like me. Because that's a goal. Like you've got to work backwards from the goal. And that's the best thing about like having all these methodologies, is that, it's the way I program. It's just like, okay, what do you want? Okay, well, this is what you want. Sweet. Okay, this is where you are. And we need to bridge that gap to get you from where you are to where you want to go. And you just look in your tool bag and you're like, okay, what's the best tool for this job? And that tool is going to change the closer we get to where we want to go. So I can't just blanket throw one methodology at it. Like I like being strong. I'm certainly not the most endurance gifted man on the earth, but if someone comes to me, and I had a strong man recently who spent three and a bit months, and that's what he wanted, was endurance. So we sat there and we worked on energy systems, like we didn't touch. It was like his strongman stuff is his strongman stuff. He knows how to do all that sort of things. But what he wanted was a bigger engine for strongman. So we need to work on, predominantly anaerobic power and capacity and aerobic power. That's what he needed to work on. And we needed to figure out how we do that. I've worked with track and field athletes, 400 meters, 800 meters, and it's every single one is different. And if if you're so blinded by one methodology, which is dogma, it's as bad as, being a religious zealot in my mind. You can't, like, how are you supposed to adapt? And like science changes all the time. Like what comes out of, some of the smartest minds on this planet consistently changes. So it's just like, identifying as a diet, if I had in my bio that I was like, plant friendly, fuck, there's something wrong with me. Same way, like I feel about people who identify as like, I'm a carnivore. You're like, no, you're not. You're just like, there's something, like adapt to whatever you need to adapt. I love Westside. I love Louis Simmons. I think like he's absolutely phenomenal. His one-sidedness, I guess, in all things, like it was just like fucking conjugate all the way. Like that's all he loved. But his love for that spawned some of the best coaches on the planet. Like Matt Wenning, like I think is brilliant. Like Wenning stuff is amazing, and he's sort of taken it to another direction again. I think you can't argue with like developing a base level of strength, and the way you get there will depend on the organism in front of you. The organism is this this guy or this girl that you've got. If we're just talking about two genders here, and we put a trigger warning at the start of this thing. But
this podcast comes with a perennial trigger warning. It's ongoing.
I feel like I need one as well. But you've got to look at the organism in front of you. You've got to look at it like what's its training age, what's its chronological age, what is its technical ability, and then I apply things on it. Like I see it, in places I train now, is that people like doing CrossFit, so they make their clients do CrossFit, as opposed to like looking at this people and like, fuck, you probably just need some machine weights so you can get strong and feel comfortable in the gym, and then like educate them a little bit. Like, and then from there, it's just like, all right, let's go and try a barbell movement, and which you're going to probably suck at, and then also understand that this isn't like a quick fix. It's a lifelong thing. I always explain to people that your body is a lazy organism. Like it's the laziest thing that's ever touched the earth, and it will adapt as quickly as possible to the stimulus that you provide. And your job, either the coach or as an athlete or as a human, is to consistently just like disturb it a little bit, so it has to consistently adapt. If you like, when we look at that performance triangle, where you got like power, strength, and endurance, like most people want to be a generalist and they want to exist in the middle there. So we've got to touch like all those three areas in some way. When we get to strength sports, then we're sort of heading in one direction, and obviously we're getting further away from all those other two areas, which is fine. But then the methodology you use for that is obviously going to be completely different. The generalist sort of sits in the middle, and you want to make sure that they're fit, healthy, and strong. And that's where I think a lot of people want to sit. I think also, and you guys do exactly the same thing, is that you want people to enjoy the shit out of training. You want them to fall in love with it as much as we do. So I always ask people, like, what do you enjoy doing? I don't say like you have to squat and we have to squat heavy. Some people are like, I don't like back squats. You're like, all right, well, can I get you strong doing leg press? Yeah, unless you have to do a back squat, like don't do it. Like, is it something we should be doing at some point? Yeah, it is. But like at the moment, like big fucking deal. Like you want stronger legs, I'll get you stronger legs. Like what? And usually it's like, oh, I don't like back squats because I hurt my back. Back squats are bad for your back. Or deadlifts are bad for your back, or whatever it is. And the explanation there, obviously, there is like, shit deadlifts are bad for your back, not the deadlift itself. I just find like what we've got now is so many coaches with polarizing opinions, and they have polarizing opinions because they get more clicks, and that drives it up. Like, I see that now, and I wonder how confusing it must be for the generalist out there trying to pick where they should go, why they should do that. And, like the three of us here, we have a certain look. So we'll generally have clients come to us who can identify like how we look. The weird thing for me is that like I get a lot of female clients as well. I get a lot of females. Now I think I produce content that, most of the time is, I think, gender neutral. I think it's nice for everyone. But what I love is when women seem to have no ego when it comes to lifting. And I often say that women are the easiest people to coach because they leave their ego at the door. They're not genetically gifted with testosterone and high amounts of hormones, so they have to work their ass off for the small amounts. So they'll listen and they become technically proficient at certain things. Whereas a guy, you have to untrain the ego, untrain the shit lifts, and then bring them back up again. I was watching your we're going to call it a step down from the box.
Yeah, my little box things yesterday.
Yep. Which
Brutal.
is fucking so good to watch, and it's so good to see. Like the regression that you need to get a progression is something that we don't talk about enough either. You know, like how do you get to where you want to go? Well, you can't just go and do the thing. You have to start from where you are. Like that's how I think programming is.
Yeah, that's that was my first kind of step towards a track meet early next year.
Yeah.
With zero ACL and chronic osteoarthritis in the knee as a result of 15 years of lifting with no ACL. So learning to absorb force through that joint is something that I'm just learning to do now. That's very uncomfortable, which I'm sure it looked very uncomfortable, and it was every single time. But I'm hoping it gets better.
Yeah. But like that is what we need to see more of, you know, like I always see, it's like, I had a lady in the gym yesterday and she was, I think she's probably in her mid 50s, maybe early 60s. And she's never jumped before. She's like, oh, we just didn't jump when I was kids. And I was like, yeah, but like, have you jumped? And she's like, no, like I've stepped over things. I've never actually jumped before. And so we were getting her jumping on a 25 kilo plate, like a bumper plate. And that was the highest thing she's done. And she was absolutely pumped with herself. And that's where she starts. Like, do I ever need her to get a 24-inch like big jump? Probably not. I don't think that's going to be value adding to her life. But the fact that she can absorb force at that age and teach her with like better landing mechanics, like that's a good thing. And do we do that in sport? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do that in sport. And I think, you know, just as a coach, you just got to keep adding to your toolbox. You know, like check the ego at the door. Ask yourself, like, if anyone walked in now, do I understand, you know, how the body works? And it's something that, like, you know, I don't need to explain to a client that I know, like, how to rehab an ACL or what I have to do with hamstring strength or why that works in terms of physiology. I just have to say, like, I can fix this and I can communicate it to you so you understand the movements, and then you'll feel better and you'll walk away, you know, stronger. And that's all I need to communicate. But as a coach, I need to understand it a whole lot more. And I think that's where we lose ourselves, is that, I don't know if you guys know who Brett Bartholomew is. He wrote that book, Conscious Coaching. And I love his stuff because he's more about, you know, communication and communicating styles and like figuring it out. And it works so well because you can have this massive bank of knowledge in your brain. You can have all these skill sets. If you can't communicate it, like it goes nowhere, you know. You can yell and scream all you want, but if people won't listen because they don't understand you or they don't like you, then you know, you're fucked. It's gone are the days when you can have, like, you know, we're not going to have too many more Jim Wendlers or Dave Tates hanging around because people get, you know, people get offended. Like, you know, you've got to be able to communicate.
Jim's still the GOAT.
Oh, he's brilliant.
Jim's still the GOAT. He'll always be the GOAT. I ran 5.31, every variation of, for legit probably 6 years straight, from 2008 to 2000 and whatever 6 years past that is.
What and
like,
it speaks
non-stop
volumes for that fucking consistency. Like, just be consistent. Turn up, lift, add weight to the bar when it gets too easy. When you feel like you're tired, have a rest week, and then try not to eat like a dickhead. And I think that's really, really simple. Like, you know, and obviously there's a huge belt of information and knowledge that comes underneath that. But that's really in a nutshell. I love that quote from Mel Siff, which is like, train as hard as you can, lift as heavy as you can, as often as you can, and stay as recovered as you can. And that's really, you know, that's training, that's S&C, and it's like, it's easiest form. Is it's like, do the most as best you can and keep that intensity as high while trying to be as recovered as you can. And that's what you have to do.
All of the more intricate details is just trying to lead us towards that simple principle.
Yeah, and the question always, like, you know, like you ask someone, how do you feel, and they're like, you know, tired, I'm like, all right, well, let's play the symptoms. Something that I learned from a dietitian, and she was always like, just to play the symptoms. Like if someone tells you that, they don't feel good, but you look at their blood work and it all seems to be okay. She's like, it doesn't matter. Like something's not right. So you play the symptoms. If someone says, this hurts my knees, and you're like, well, you squat pretty well, everything goes pretty well. I'm like, well, just you listen to the symptom. Like the symptom is this. Like, so we need to like change it up. We need to listen to the body all the time. And I always do that. Like I think the player or the person knows their body a whole lot better than you do. Sometimes they don't know their ability level, and sometimes that's when cool coaching comes in, when you provide them a platform to do something they never have, and then they're like, oh shit, I didn't think I could do that. What about you guys? Like I don't, I'm assuming like beards. I'm not sure what's under your hat, Ben. Hopefully it's a big head of hair. Fucking jealous, righto.
Fucking beautiful head of hair.
But like, how did you like? Why did you guys get started? Like, how come it's ended up here?
Do you want me to go first, Nick?
Mm-hmm.
So I played high-level basketball and track and field when I was younger. Competed track and field at a national, international level. Got a sports scholarship to a really high-end school down here. Played basketball at state, national level as a kid. I tried to take a massive charge at the national championships when I was like under 14s and didn't get up off the ground and was pretty much paralyzed from the waist down for about 6 hours. So that was a fun time. So obviously like sport was a massive part of my childhood growing up. And then when that all happened, it took me ages to kind of like get back into a groove where I was, had the confidence to put my body on the line again. Managed to, play high level basketball all throughout high school. Again, the school that I was fortunate enough to get an athletic scholarship to was a very good basketball school down here in Victoria as well. Was pretty much on the first squad from year 9 through to year 12. But then with a few other injuries and illnesses throughout school, sort of missed a really good opportunity to, potentially go over to the US and do we did a summer tour over there. So I missed any chance I had at, any sort of scholarship opportunities or anything like that. And then had a bit of a butting of heads with my coach in year 12. Like obviously, as a basketballer, everyone's looking at height. There's little old me running around at like 5'7", being like, I'm not very tall, but I can dunk. I'm the fastest guy on the court. Was never the strongest player offensively, but when I played basketball as a kid, like I was like the number 1 ranked defensive guard in the country at one point. Like I was incredibly annoying defensively. So when it came to like a point where I was like, well, shit, like I don't really feel like I'm ever going to have the opportunities to play sport at a high level, but I love sport. I love training. How can I make this viable? And it was kind of at the same time figuring out how I could train without my back hurting all the time. So that's kind of what got me into training in the first place, was like, I like the gym, but I'm always fucking sore after I squat and deadlift.
Yeah.
So I ended up going and spending, I think it was like 4 days up in Sydney with Sebastian Oreb back in like 2014, just before GPA Worlds were on.
Yeah.
So he bought out the Lily Bridges to do a seminar at his gym in North Sydney just before they opened. So I went to that, I learnt off them. That set up an aspect of my career. But for me, it was always just like, I want to I like playing sport. I like doing things at high levels. But injuries kind of got in my way. So for me, it was very much well, shit, I need to figure out how I can move in a way where I'm not sore all the time. And then when I kind of figured that out, I'm like, I reckon I can probably do this for other people as well.
Yeah.
So, I'm pretty fortunate. Like most of the people that I work with, thankfully, don't have major structural issues. So I'm like, if there's no major structural issues, but you're in pain all the time, like it's something I can get you out of pretty confidently. And that's been a massive point where, you can yield some, as you said, you get people a good base level of strength, and it's quite literally life-changing for a lot of people, whether they're gen pop, whether they're, semi-professional athletes. Like, you get people stronger, they're going to be better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what was the injury like? What hit you in the spine?
So the hard thing is, I don't actually think I ever got a formal diagnosis. So pretty much they took me to hospital after the incident, and they're like, we think you may have broken your back. So we'll chuck you on an X-ray table and do an X-ray and see what's going on. And
Fuck.
to remember, I'm in agony, and they put me on the table, and I was in that much pain that I couldn't actually relax on the table. So I'm seized up like crazy. And they're like, mate, just relax. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's like telling your missus to relax in a fight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Goes well.
Yeah.
And so I'm on the table or whatever, trying to get an X-ray, and my whole body's just in massive seized up, and they're trying to tell me to relax. Can't. They do an X-ray. They're like, look, you haven't broken anything, but we don't know why you have no feeling in your lower body. So they did the whole squeeze my toes. Do you feel this? I'm like, nah. They squeezed my shins. I'm like, nah. My quads, nah. They were pretty much palpating my ASIS. They're like, anything here? I'm like, nah. And it wasn't really until they got to around about sort of halfway between my belly button and bottom of the ribs. So I was like, oh, I can kind of feel that. And mind you, I was
that's fucking scary.
12 when this happened. So, and it was up in Alice Springs as well. So it was, there's a few variables there. I'm like, oh.
Quality medicine. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was about 6 hours later that I was like, I could wriggle my big toe.
Yeah.
So the only sort of half explanation I've been able to get from anyone, obviously, after the fact, is that it just sounds like you would experience severe nerve shock with the level of impact on your pelvis on the hardwood floors. It's it almost, yeah, they were just the only explanation I've actually gotten, which again, I'll take with a grain of salt, is someone's like, oh, it just sounds like there was potentially some major nerve shock that you experienced, and your body kind of just shut shit down as a bit of a preventative measure. But it's hard to say. I even tried contacting the hospital X amount of years afterwards, be like, hey, look, I was a patient. I got admitted to emergency. This was the date. This was the rough year. Do you, by chance, have my records on hand? I'm trying to figure some stuff out. And they're like, we don't have your records anymore. Sorry.
Perfect.
Good. Yeah. Easy.
Yeah. But I mean, me being me, I've never gone down the route of getting MRIs or anything like that, because if it came back with it, oh, well, you've got this extensive injury list, I don't want that to then fuck with me mentally. I'm like, I can function really well now. If my back ever does flare up, I've got the tools to be able to manage it and get it back to a point where it's good again. So yeah, I just try and do as much as I can for as long as I can, and then when something does sort of catch me and flare up, then it's cool, we go back to the rehab process that essentially for me now is tried and tested. And so I hurt my back in November again. I was warming up for deadlifts, pulled 225, and at about my knee I was little pop, and I was like, oh, that didn't feel very good. Could barely unload the bar, but then 7 weeks later I could safety bar, good morning, 200 for 10.
Yeah, right.
So it's a weird thing, but I'm when I hurt my back, it's it's annoying and it's frustrating, but it's I know that in 6, 7, maybe 8 weeks time, I'm probably going to be back to a pretty good level of strength again.
Yeah, that's always nice to know. That's a confidence thing, isn't it? There's one thing I looked at early on, was that as soon as I'm capable, I try to get back into the range that I need to see if I ever hurt. I've only hurt my back twice. Been very lucky. But the first thing I did was right, I've got to get away from this fear. And I've got to get if I can squat a quarter, I squat a quarter. If I can deadlift or RDL, yeah, fuck, the back stuff is nuts.
Yeah, so on Tuesday night, so I do S&C work for a Big V basketball club down here in Victoria. And we're one of the guys on Tuesday night who was running, and then next thing you know, he's like on the ground, like yelling in pain. He's like, I've done my back, in just like sheer panic. And everyone's like, we've got, some people that have some outdated knowledge around like S&C and that sort of stuff. So the first thing they start to do is like start trying to stretch him out.
Oh.
I'm like, stop. Like, we get him up. Like, I walk him sort of like away from training so that he's safe and everyone can keep doing what they're doing. I'm like, dude, like, what? Like, can you bend forward? And he got like 2 centimeters range of motion. I'm like, all right, cool, that's fine. I'm like, can you get, like, if you have to go up onto your toes, that's fine. But I'm like, can you get into the bottom of the squat? And he got down there and he's like, oh man, that feels so nice. I'm like, okay, cool. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physio, nothing like that. I'm not going to diagnose you. But I think there's definitely ways that we can look at getting you rehabbed pretty quickly. And we should be able to have you back to playing within 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah. Well, like within, like if it's a proper, like acute injury, there's no walking away from those things.
Yeah.
What about you, Nick?
Yeah,
like, where did it all start for you?
Mine was a pretty typical story. I'm 6'6", and I've always been extremely tall compared to everyone else. So I was playing junior rugby league at 12 years old, and I looked like I was 18. So all of the coaches are always like, "Oh, the 14s and the 15s and the 16s are short. Can you play up 4 age groups to fill in the front row? Because you're big enough."
Yeah.
And I obviously never said no to an opportunity, but I very quickly figured out that at 12 years old, even though I was as big as the 16-year-olds, there's a lot of development that happens between 12 and 16, and I just was getting annihilated every week. So I begged my dad to sign me up to a gym and take me to the gym every morning before school. So that's kind of how I started. Was I just literally didn't want to keep getting embarrassed every week playing 4 age groups up in the front row. But it did really well. Like I fell in love with the gym, not necessarily from a training perspective, but more just so it made me a better athlete. It made me stronger, and I liked how physically capable it made me feel when I was on the field. And it gave me a lot of confidence when I was playing, and I felt like I was the only one. Even in the 16-year-olds, I was one of the only few guys at 12, 13, 14 years old playing against 16-year-olds. I was one of the only guys that were actually training outside of the structured team sessions that we'd do on the field. And I just felt better than everyone else, and I liked that feeling. So I stuck with it. And then obviously getting the older I got, then I got exposed to rep teams and selections in better teams, which came with more structured strength and conditioning sessions. And then it just kind of grew from there. And then when I moved to Queensland to play Queensland Cup at 18, I was given the opportunity to do my Cert 3 and 4 in Fortitude Valley with the Australian Institute of Fitness when they were based out of there. This was before the internet, so I had to go in there 2 nights a week for 12 months to get my Cert 3 and 4. And the club played for that. So I said, yeah, well, if you're paying for it, I'll do it. And then, graduated there and started doing face-to-face PT, believe it or not, out of all places, out of the Novotel Hotel in Brisbane City.
Oh, beautiful.
I bartered a deal where I would hire the gym space from the hotel, and that's where I would do my PT out of.
I think I did work experience in there in like year 10 or something.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so that's kind of what I did, and then it just kind of went from there. Moved over to the States for 10 years, found powerlifting in, like I said, 2008. I was doing 531, found a crew over there, Scott Cartwright. He was a West Side lifter and incredibly strong guy. Trained with his crew, did a few sessions at Mark Bell's gym over there in Sacramento before it was open to the public, which was really cool. Back when he was a powerlifter, and then it just kind of happened from there.
Who would you reckon?
More so the fact now.
Sorry, keep going.
Go ahead.
No, you're right. Keep going.
I just think I just, like I said, I just love the fact that how strength training made me feel.
Yeah.
And much like what you said, it's never really been a matter of like, I really love doing this, so I'm going to keep doing it. It's more a matter of, I really love how I feel and I don't want to feel worse than this, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say, like, I never want to run in, like, but the idea behind being strong is like how hard it is to get strong. And I don't think people understand to add 5 kilos to a back squat or to add 2.5 kilos to your bench or anything along those lines until you've sort of teased out all those, beginner, intermediate gains. And then you have to like push for like, 6 months just to be able to press something just a little bit heavier. The process of what happens along that is really what matters. Like you go through and you're like trying to like squeeze everything you can out of your triceps, like trying to figure out like, is my bracing position is correct? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Like maybe I should wear this, or maybe I should turn my feet out slightly here. Like all those little things. I always say that like, because I was such a shitty athlete, like it's made me a better coach because I've had to look for the 1%ers all the time to get myself slightly better. Like I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. We often say that is like, you find in all sports, majority of great coaches, whether it's strength coaches or skill coaches, are failed athletes that just really love that sport.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true.
So, and they're smart enough to learn, the intricacies of the sport. They're just not athletically gifted enough to apply it to themselves, so they teach other people how to do it.
Yeah. Like, what do you guys do? Like, think of like it's. I always get this question all the time, and it's always hard for me to answer. But like, if you're a coach, regardless of like a strength coach or a PT or whatever, I get people asking me like, where should I go to learn more? And it's a fundamental, like massive problem, I think. Like where do you send up and coming guys and girls who want to increase their knowledge? Now it's an easy throwaway to be like, hey, podcasts and books, and I say that all the time as well. But in terms of like like it's really hard to point someone in the right direction because everything has got its pros and cons. There's not this perfect thing I've ever found.
Yeah, I definitely don't think there's a perfect answer. Like you said, books and podcasts books are always going to be there, and I think that they should they're always going to be there, and I think there's definitely a good use for them, and I'll explain what that is. So podcasts, I find it interesting that you mentioned that because that's quite literally the reason that Ben and I started this podcast is we were unhappy with what we saw within the industry. And I know we were both very frustrated with the amount of information that you could put on Instagram and the short attention spans that really short form clickbaity content has created. And it's just, you can't put the nuance, you can't have the conversations that you really need to have to foster a good learning environment on that platform. So we said, fuck it, let's just start a podcast and let's just talk for 3 hours every week. And surely during that 3 hours, we're going to be able to put out a decent amount of information that can maybe start to point people in a direction. If they like that direction, they can then take the information that they get and look to further their own education via books and other means. I think for me, the best thing that I ever did was look at people that were in the positions that I wanted to be in and get in the same rooms as them as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you're there, don't be silent. When you're there, ask the questions that you want to ask, learn the things you want to learn, and observe what they're doing and how they got to where they're at, because that's going to be the best lesson you can learn.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
And I'm still doing that now, which is why you're on this podcast.
I just come on for hair tips.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree, and I think the one thing that like we can never skip on is this, like, you know, you guys same as me, is that you've been learning and training and gathering information for the last 15 fucking plus years. That can't go understated, because what I used to produce, you know, 10 years ago, I'd fucking slap myself with it now, you know. But that's the, you know, that's you evolving as a coach, and what I would do now versus what I used to do. But that all comes to the fact that, like, you know, and how quickly I can explain stuff, or now, like, I can look at something straight away and be like, okay, like, you know, observing this, it means that it's probably going to be A, B, or C, and this is what I need to problem solve. The time on the floor, it's one thing I hate with this online coaching, you know, like jerk off stuff, is that they don't know how a program applies to an individual on the floor. They don't know how that works in a gym scenario. Like, it's great, you can throw all these exercises somewhere, but think about the individual walking around the average gym going, all right, so you want me to go to that machine and go back over there and come back over here. Like, think about the nuances, think about the human, and then how that's going to apply to that person in general. You know, and what is it like to coach and manage a group of people? Like, you guys know it. Like, you know, managing fucking athletes is like herding cats. You know, it's hard. You know, trying to get them to do stuff. You know?
Yes. Yes.
And you walk away from a session, and it could go for, you know, like we used to do like 2 sessions at the Roosters, and where we do like split the squad in half, and some would wrestle, some would strength train, or someone would do something else. And at the end of that 2.5 hours, whatever it was, like, I just needed to, like, turn all the music off in the gym and just sit there and just stare at the ground for a while, because I was like this, you know. And then I would think, like, okay, how can I do that better tomorrow? You know, like, what do I need to do, and how quickly I can get the job done, because I know their attention span is like, they're not in here to lift, and they're not, you know, not wearing the jersey so they can lift big numbers. They're here because they want to get better on the field, and all they love doing is playing and training, like, on the field. So I need to make this environment as fun, as as carefree as possible, but as serious as possible, so they get the job done. And I need to make sure that, like, I tick all those boxes so they go out there and play their best. You know, and take my ego out. Like, so that's why I love sport, is that, like, you and I, we all love strength training, and we would spend all our time in the gym. These guys are like, that's just one box I need to tick so I can go and display what I need to do on the court or on the field. So as a strength coach, and that's why, yeah, I love those footy meetings where the physios want to say something, you know, the skills coach, this coach, that coach, and then you're left at the bottom end of, like, begging for, like, can I please have 60 minutes to get these guys where you need to? And can we not do it after a fucking 3-hour field session? That would be really helpful, you know, to the stress response that we're going to get tomorrow, you know? And you'd feel for the boys too. They'd come in after 3 hours and they're like, righto, what do I have to fucking do? You're like, well, we did have like 87% efforts here today, but how about I just get you to do, like, why don't you hit me with, like, you know, 3 sets of 3 of your best, and then we'll superset it with that, and then let's just play around there, and let's get that done for me. And they're like, cheers, yeah, can I eat? Like, yeah, go and bring your food in. Like, you know, do whatever you need to do. Yep. Like, you know, and sometimes, you know, like, that's what it is. In preseason, I used to, like, fucking haggle and just, like, beg and plead for, like, more time, because really, when the season's going, you're reactive as opposed to being able to do anything else, you know. So preseason was my time to be able to do stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the floor coaching is fucking insane fun, you know.
Yeah, it is. I think you touched on a really important point there of, like, looking back at, you know, how you programmed or how you coached 15 years ago and just being like, fuck, what the fuck was I doing? But that's an important process. Is if you were doing 15 years ago what you're doing now and you hadn't evolved, that would be a red flag.
Yeah.
So I think it's, like, a really good message to kind of put out there as well to younger coaches or people that are looking to grow, is just like, at some point you just have to do something and understand that it's probably going to be wrong, but that's part of the evolution of growing. And I see a lot of people, especially now with social media and everything being so highlighted, you make one wrong move, you get fucking virality on Instagram for being a fucking idiot, where it's like, come on, like, we've all made mistakes. It's just like, maybe when we made mistakes, Instagram wasn't around, so no one saw it, except for the 5 guys that were in the room, and they forgot about it next week when you did it right.
Yeah.
So it's like at some point you just have to do the thing and understand that you're going to be shit for a little while before you get better, and that's the process, and it's okay.
Yeah, and that's the best part. Is it's like it's going back and having a look at what you used to do, and then figuring out like, all right, like how do I get better, or applying something for the first time. I used to love finding something out and be like, right, like, you know, I feel bad for some people because I would just apply. I would get so good at trying to coach this thing that I would just give it to as many people as I could, you know, as often as I could. Just be like, I don't fucking care if this, like, it makes them cry. We're doing it so often, but like, I'm going to make sure this works. And then, you know, like queuing something. I still remember, like, maybe it was 2017 or 18. I was queuing a deadlift with someone, and I couldn't get this individual to get it right. And I think I said something like, you know, like, break the bar in half and push your feet through the ground. And he was like, oh shit, like, push your feet through the ground. Like, that's fucking the best cue ever. Like, oh, that makes sense now. And I was like,
it's the whole like language around it can be so different from person to person.
yeah. And then that was it. That was literally like, and then everything made sense. And I was like, right. So it's all about, I'd go away and I'd think about like, all right, if I'm running a session, I'd think, okay, that session was good. How do I make the next session even better? How do I make this one run even smoother? Like, how do I set the gym up so it just flows nice? You know, how do I get them to walk out and execute everything I want them to do? Because I used to list things up on the board and say like, okay, we have to do this. I would love you to do this. And, you know, like, if you get time, do this. So I tier it in terms of importance. And I'd always put fucking buys and tries at the end, you know, so that like they get through there. And, you know, especially the Islander boys, fuck, they love their arms.
Yeah, because they just grow as soon as they look at a weight.
You think so, but like, I'll shout out to Satilli, the Roosters, smallest chest, smallest bench, ever on a man. But you think it'd grow, but Tilly still hasn't got. He's got a chest of like a small bird. Yeah, I had to once. I had to give him the football bar because it was so embarrassing putting him on a straight bar and how badly he would bench compared to the rest of the boys because his numbers were so low. And so I used to say, like, use a football bar, and I can use this as an excuse as to why your numbers are different. I'll say that it's a different stimulus, and like, he's like, sweet, yeah, cheers. So I'd put Tilly on a football bar, and they'd be like, Tilly, you fucking, like, you're weak as piss. And I'm like, no, it's because the bar's different, it's harder. Like, you know, it's just different. That's why he's doing it, because his shoulder, you know, not the fact that he's weak as piss in the bench press. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, Kev, what we do is like the last segment before we finish up is we have this thing that we do where the previous guest gets to ask the next guest a question. You don't get to know who the guest was. You just get to know the question, and then afterwards I'll give you an opportunity to do the same. So the previous guest question to you is, and it ties in really well to the conversation that we've been having actually, is do you remember your first ever workout in a gym, and what was it?
Oof. Yeah. So it was the first ever gym I went to was a live gym and fitness in Strathpine here in Brisbane. And I did a session with the coach at the time. I think he had like a Cert 3. He was like extremely large individual. I now know that he was like popping more steroids than fucking I have hot chocolates. But we went through a leg session, and I still remember it because I had to catch the train home and I couldn't walk. I slid down the wall at the train station and sat down, and then when it was time to stand up, I couldn't push my back against the wall, so I missed the first train. He buckled my legs that bad. I felt pain in my lower body, I reckon, for at least 14 days. And I think my mum almost went down to the gym to have a crack at this guy because I couldn't walk. She didn't understand DOMS. But I couldn't move my little baby legs for so long. And I still remember, like, Michael was the guy's name. If you're out there, Michael Griffiths, you can go fuck yourself. But yeah, I still remember that dude because that was like I remember like begging with my mum, please don't go down to the gym and please don't make me like it's going to be worse for me if I go back in there. Yeah, it was just it was a brutal leg day. It was brutal, and he wouldn't let me go away. Like I couldn't walk away from it, and I was intimidated as well. Like he was a huge dude, and I think I said something in our first like talk. It was just like, what do you want to do? And I want to get big and strong. I want to do this. I might even said like I want to compete one day in bodybuilding. And the whole session, he was just like, you want to be a fucking competitor? You want to fucking get bigger? This is how we train.
He's just jamming
just ruined me. But I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Like I was going to school, just going, I can't walk. Like I can't fucking walk. Like I think this guy fucking borderline like almost killed me. But like I might have had rhabdo at some point. Before that was cool to say.
That's the hottest. That's the new hottest thing. Cool. That's an awesome answer, man. So what question would you like to ask our next guest?
So you get you just get coaches on here. You get everyone in particular.
Our next guest is a coach from the US.
Perfect. So I'd love to know which coach has had the biggest impact on this guy or girl and why.
Awesome. That's a sick question.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else, Benjamin?
I'm all good.
Awesome. Kev, thanks so much for joining us, mate. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too, fellas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I've got a quick shout out to a friend of mine, Jane. Jane is China's pickleball champion. And we're playing against each other on Sunday. So she's quite a good pickleball champion. She's quite fast.
I do see that you've been playing quite a bit of pickleball on Instagram. So if anyone wants to follow along your pickleball journeys and get some gold strength and conditioning nuggets along the way, where can they find you?
The Instagram is at Strength Elite. Or I think if you Google my name, it's the same thing. I will caveat that I got that tagline like in 2013 or 14, way before I thought I couldn't change it. So I'd much prefer if it was just my name now, but we're stuck with that fucking name. But yeah, and then I don't have a website, but yeah, Instagram's the easiest place.
Instagram, perfect. Strength Elite, and I highly suggest that everyone follows along because there's fantastic information on there, and Kev's a champion.
Thank you so much, fellas.
Awesome, mate.